One of the world's most luxurious cruise liners headed out from New York Harbor to Liverpool in the midst of a global war. The nearly 2,000 people on the ship were enjoying themselves on a warm and calm day, playing cards, shuffleboard, and dancing, when a German submarine fired a torpedo that struck the ship clean. Within 20 minutes, the ship sank, leaving over 1,000 people dead and over 100 of them Americans, who were still neutral in this war but wouldn't be for long. The sinking of the ship raised tensions between America and Germany and proved to be a pivotal event that drove America into the horrors of the Great War that was erupting across Europe. But why would Germany risk sinking a civilian ship? And just how neutral was America really? Well, that's just the treasure we're out to discover. I'm Dan Luer, and this is History for Humans. Take a close look at our anchor image. That's the RMS Lusitania, one of the world's finest and largest cruise ships in the beginning of the 20th century. Besides noticing that it's capsizing, its sheer size, what else do you notice? Take a look at the few lifeboats, but not many at all, that are coming to the rescue, because that's a key part of today's story lecture. But before we go any further, our exploration question for today is, if the Lusitania was not shot down by German submarines, would America have entered World War I? So keep your mind focused on the importance of the Lusitania and other events leading America into the war. But life jackets on, y'all, because we got some history to swim through first. The RMS Lusitania launched as part of the British Cunard Line in 1906 and was constructed with the help of the British Admiralty, or Navy, to potentially be used as a light merchant cruiser in a time of war if necessary. Foreshadowing! Passenger cruise lines were a big business then, just as they are today, and the North Atlantic was home to all of the action between the liners and the countries competing for business. In the late 1800s, it was a rising Germany that had only recently unified as a nation a few decades earlier, but it was quickly becoming a powerhouse in Europe and upsettling the balance of power there. And they offer the most elegant and luxurious experiences across the frosty waters between America and Europe. Kaiser-class ocean liners were advertised, and they were the BMW or Mercedes-Benz of the high seas. Can't beat German engineering, but the Brits were aiming to. The Lusitania was designed to be the new gold standard. It housed a new massive engine, 68,000 horsepower, that could average about 25 knots, and it was advertised as the Greyhound of the seas. The ballrooms and halls were decorated with massive frescoes in the style of Louis XIV, and Lucy could hold 552 first-class passengers, but made room for second and third-class fares as well, so it wasn't only the incredible rich on board. There was a mix of classes. However, there was segregation between the classes on board.
Mr. Luer, this is all sounding too much like the script of the Titanic, but I guess they wouldn't be yelling about icebergs but torpedoes instead, and I fear this doesn't have a happy ending either.
You're right to notice the similarities, Chloe, and imagining the events and recalling the movie The Titanic can actually help you visualize parts of this story. And when the Lusitania first departed for her maiden voyage, a crowd of 200,000 gathered to watch the magnificent vessel first launch in September of 1907. The name Lusitania came from an ancient Roman province, and it was also the name of a previous British ship built in the 1870s but tragically sunk in 1901, which was a bad omen.
Spoiler!
I think you knew that was coming. Anywho, Lucy became the world's fastest passenger ship, but due to fierce competition would not remain so for long, and others passed her by. And just as Germany and Britain were in a battle for passenger liners and supremacy in commercial shipping, a single assassination of a foreign prince would lead both of them into battle in the Great War, where the stakes were much higher. It's hard to say that tensions had been rising in Europe in the decades before the Great War, due to the fact that tensions there are generally pretty high and the potential for war is always on the horizon for you students of world history, but several underlying factors were certainly leading to a tipping point. Industrialization led to an arms race, and militarism, as industrial powers stockpiled their militaries on land and sea with the latest and greatest new weapon technologies with frightful effect. Imperialism and the fight for land and treasure across the globe only raised the stakes for war, as defeating your enemy could also mean gaining access to their overseas empire. And maybe most importantly, the rising new powers like Germany and Russia led to a complicated system of alliances to balance power, which were made to avoid war but then would backfire. And lastly, rising nationalism across the world led many people to want to fight fiercely to defend their countries with blood if necessary. Remembering the acronym MAIN can help you recall these underlying factors: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism, because on June 28, 1914, when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, was assassinated with his wife by a Serbian nationalist wanting freedom for his people, all those underlining main factors came crashing down on the world in the most horrifying and frightful war the world had yet seen. After the assassination of the Archduke, Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia. Russia had an alliance with Serbia and came to her defense. Germany, who was aligned with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia. And then Russia's ally France declared war on Germany, which led Germany to invade France through neutral Belgium, which then brought in Britain, who had an alliance with neutral Belgium. All that's to say, the dominoes fell frightfully quickly as Europe fell into total war with those militaries that had been getting stockpiled for decades. The big allied powers of the war were made up of Britain, France, and Russia, and then later Italy. The Central Powers were dominated by Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. As the war broke out, America under President Wilson quickly announced neutrality. Though America was much more closely aligned culturally, economically, and politically with the Allies, especially Britain, America was a nation of immigrants from all over Europe, which could easily divide the nation if we enter the conflict. But more importantly, this war seemed to have nothing to do with America. As Wilson stated, this vast, gruesome contest of systemized destruction was a fight between imperial powers for colonies and wealth and had nothing to do with us. Still yet, there were Americans like Theodore Roosevelt who called on America to begin readying to join the war to help the Allies, forming the preparedness movement. However, most Americans still supported neutrality and peace. But if America was neutral in the war, they were really never neutral in trade. American business interests and loans favored the Allies heavily, and in that way we were never quite fully neutral. And America was profiting handsomely from the war, but the waters outside of Europe that American ships needed to cross were becoming increasingly dangerous, even for neutral nations just looking to profit from their wholesale slaughter. And whereas the Royal Navy was the unmatched queen of the high seas, a newly mastered technology by the Germans, the submarine or U-boat, gave Germany an advantage. And as the war grew more and more desperate, they began targeting merchant ships loaded with civilians, and Americans were beginning to get shaken out of their neutral boots. The Lusitania was the pride and crown jewel of Liverpool, and part of a very productive industry for the city. But as you might guess, when war broke out, it dampened business for the cruise line industry, journeying between America and Europe. As the war stretched on, Lucy was operating well below full capacity, but still managing to stay in operation with over 1,000 passengers on a given ship.
So wait, even though there's a war going on, some people still felt they needed to take a cruise into a war zone? What is wrong with these people?
Hindsight, Mahina, is 2020, and I hear you. But it's true that tens of thousands made that same journey safe and sound. You see, there were actually rules in place for how to shoot down passenger liners that countries had agreed to follow, even in war.
How utterly civilized of them.
Yup. And the so-called cruiser lines required allowing the civilians of ships to depart safely if that ship was to be sunk or confiscated, so innocents enjoying a cruise could rest easy at sea. The problem was, though, that the British merchant ships were ordered by the Navy to ram and sink submarines that surfaced to enforce those cruiser rules, so the Germans were not quite fond of following them either. On top of that, remember, the Lusitania was subsidized by the British Admiralty and could be used during times of war, and Lucy actually had a secret compartment in the hull designed to store military cargo in case of war, and the Navy was starting to put that to use. Germany suspected this, and when Lucy landed in New York Harbor on April 24, 1915, the German embassy in America took out 50 newspaper ads warning Americans not to travel into the waters of the North Atlantic, that there was a flipping war on, and could be dangerous with the fact that there's a flipping war on. One ad with exceptional irony ran directly next to an ad for the Lusitania. There should really be a word for when history and irony meet like that. Hystyrony. I like it. But the hystyrony was missed on those 139 Americans who boarded Lucy with about 1,000 others, and they left for a wonderful time on May 1st. And the captain of the ship, Walter Schweiger, had made reassuring statements about the safety of the vessel, its speed, and the protection it would receive from the Royal Navy as it approached the war zone. But what the passengers didn't know, but what the Germans did suspect, was that the ship's secret compartments were loaded with armaments meant for the Allied forces. The passengers, though, enjoyed 5 beautiful days on board. The weather was beautiful, the sea was relatively calm. Music played, people danced, some played cards, and the third-class passengers were playing shuffleboard on deck. The most expensive room, which was fashioned in the style of the Palace of Versailles, was occupied on this very voyage by one of the world's richest men, Alfred Vanderbilt, son of the railroad tycoon. And it seemed all was well on the morning of May 7th as they were approaching the British Isles. But then, the British Navy contacted Captain Schweiger of the dangers of German submarines in the area that they were approaching. In the weeks before, several ships had just been shot down. They sent Captain Schweiger the location of the German U-boats and ordered him to make evasive action. But the captain didn't have the correct codes to translate the message, and the danger was unrealized. Lucy was heading right towards Liverpool, unescorted and unknowing that there were several German subs patrolling the waters. Had they received the message with her speed, Lucy would easily have been able to outrun and outmaneuver the submarines. But at 2:10 in the afternoon, just 11 miles outside the southern coast of Ireland, a U-boat fired a single torpedo and it struck clean on the starboard bow. Engineers had believed that the Lusitania was struck, passengers would have 5 to 6 hours before the massive ship sunk. Plenty of time to get the passengers safely onto lifeboats. But the ship sank in just 18 minutes. Almost immediately after the strike from the torpedo, a second blast, probably from the boilers, erupted through the hull. And then she sank with incredible speed. And due to the severe list, recall our anchor image, the sharp angle on the starboard side of the ship. It sent people tumbling down staircases and hallways and scrambling with little time to escape. Inside the 6 floors, chaos ensued, but the crew still performed miracles, directing people as best they could to safety, attempting to load them onto lifeboats. But due to the list, only 6 of the 48 launched successfully, as most crashed and sank into the sea. Alfred Vanderbilt and a few others from his party were working frantically, trying to tie life jackets to baskets to hold infants out of the freezing water. But time was against them. None of the infants nor Mr. Vanderbilt survived. In total, 1,198 people died in the waters off of the coast of Ireland, including 128 Americans. A mass grave was dug in Ireland to bury the dead, and by the following morning, news of the atrocities spread around the globe. Riots broke out across England, and German citizens were interned for their own safety in Liverpool to keep them out of the hands of the angry mobs. In America, anti-German sentiment was widespread, and though Germany apologized for the attack, they also justified it as not a mere civilian liner, but a ship of war carrying munitions that would be used to kill Germans in the field. This apology and promise to end unrestricted submarine warfare was short-lived, and through submarines and a few other factors, America was soon mobilizing for war. In the election of 1916, Wilson was re-elected on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And this reflects that Americans, by and large, wanted to avoid the conflict. However, their preference for peace would be put to the test after the sinking of the Lusitania. For starters, Germany continued to sink American merchant ships, attempting to trade with the Allied powers. And then they signed the Sussex Pledge, promising not to attack American merchant ships. But then they later broke that promise. And as more American ships and civilians perished, more started to push for preparedness. Then, in January of 1917, the British intercepted a secret cable known as the Zimmerman Note, sent from Germany to Mexico, that proposed an alliance between the countries and promised Mexico that they'd be able to reclaim Texas and other territories they had lost in the Mexican-American War. Now, this alone could have surely moved America to war, but then Germany took even more aggressive action, hoping to win the war before America could really get its boots on, and they resumed unrestricted submarine warfare. That was the final straw that sent President Wilson on April 2nd, 1917 to call on Congress to declare war. And America was about to turn the tide of war that had been stalemated for years. And how a wholly unprepared and isolated nation readied, fought, and helped win this war will be the topics of our next 3 episodes, so tune in for that. So, did the Lusitania bring America into World War I? Well, considering the war was not declared for another 2 years, it's hard to say that that was the central catalyst. But, as a single event, it does stand alone in turning the hearts and minds of so many Americans into what was at stake in this war, and whose side they were on, first with their hearts and later with their guns. Winston Churchill said, "In spite of all its horror, we must regard the sinking of the Lusitania as an event most important and favorable to the Allies. The poor babies who perished in the ocean struck a blow at German power more deadly than could have been achieved by the sacrifice of 100,000 men. Indeed, the Lusitania marked a change in the circumstance of war that would continue to tremble the world in the 20th century, that civilian casualties are a key and foundational feature of modern warfare. But we study history to learn from the mistakes so we can pave a better way forward and not be victims of his tyranny. So, thanks for daring to learn today. This has been History for Humans." And now for a favor to ask, if you like what we do here, it would be awesome if you just clicked and showed it and subscribed if you wanted. And you can head over to our website where there are resources and you can join in a conversation with other students from around the country. And if you're doing the learning activity, hang out for a second because we got instructions coming up next. All right, y'all, we're going to be mixing history with art and creativity and the power of persuasion in today's lesson. For those creative and artistic students, get ready to shine. And for those like myself who aren't the best artists, well, you can still enjoy the process and the learning activity. There are 2 major parts to this assignment. One is to do a reading to review America in the years before the war and the events that helped bring us into that war. And then you're going to learn about propaganda in that reading. You're going to answer a few quick questions on the side. And then in part 2, the more enjoyable part, the part I really want you to get into, you're going to be creating creating a propaganda poster. And the focus of your propaganda poster is going to be on the Lusitania, and you're going to try to get Americans to support the war effort. Yes, feel free to go online and look up some awesome propaganda posters like these. And how's this one? Most of you guys have probably seen this before. Notice that it's simple but yet powerful. So it does not need to be complex. If you can, flex. If not, just do your best. And I'll see you next time. Peace.